Summary of the Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. In the beginning of his book, Michael Pollan assesses the United States with a national eating disorder. He says that constantly changing food trends and competing diets are making it very hard for Americans to decide what to eat. People have this problem because they are omnivores by nature, which means they can eat most plants and animals. This means they have to choose what to eat. This issue is especially serious in a country with a huge variety of foods, many of which have been treated a lot and are very different from their original forms. Pollan wants to find out where important American foods come from, like corn. He does this by following corn from fields to fast food places, going from one end of the food chain to the other. In this way, he looks into what the decisions Americans make in the modern food system mean and tries to answer the question of what Americans should eat for their own good and for the good of the world. Pollan looks at the American food system through the lens of 4 meals that reflect 3 food chains: the industrial, the organic, and the hunter-gatherer. Fast food, which is part of the industrial food system, is the first meal he talks about. He starts with corn, which is a food that is grown all over the United States and is often eaten. A huge amount of corn is grown to feed cattle and other animals kept in factories. The rest of the corn is refined to make many of the ingredients in processed foods, which give many well-known foods their taste, texture, color, and starch. Because it is a useful plant that can be used for food, alcohol, and power, corn, species name Z maize, has changed to meet human needs and developed with people. Pollan goes to Iowa to talk to 2 farmers who grow corn as part of the corporate system. They use every tool and chemical they can to get as much corn as they can on their land. It is not possible to connect a specific ear of corn to the meal that it is used to make because corn from fields across the middle of the country is processed in factories together. 3/5 of that corn is used to feed animals on factory farms. It's also hard to keep track of the growth of a single cow, but Pollan buys a steer named 534 and sees it. 534 is born on a ranch in South Dakota. When he is 6 months old, he is sent to a farm in Kansas and told to eat only corn. This is easier and cheaper than letting cows graze, and it makes them fat enough to make the succulent meat that Americans like. But cows' guts are complicated and have evolved to digest grass only. Eating corn makes them sick, so they need to go to the vet and take medicines all the time. The corn that isn't fed to cows is sent to factories, where it is complicatedly processed into different foods and substances that can't be eaten, mostly high-fructose corn syrup. It's clear that the food industry is driven by the financial needs of food companies and producers rather than what's best for people, animals, or the environment, because food scientists are always coming up with new and more difficult ways to use corn. The corn business is bad for the environment because it uses a lot of fossil fuels to make fertilizers. Also, having only one crop is not natural and needs chemicals to kill off all the other plants and animals that live in cornfields. Corn has also hurt American customers by making it easy and cheap to get calories that are bad for you. People eat a certain amount of food every day, so these companies have a financial reason to find cheap and efficient ways to pack as many calories into a food as possible while also getting people to eat more. Pollan eats his McDonald's meal in the car with his wife Judith and son Isaac. The meal makes him think of how far away from nature it is, which he saw when he looked into where the items came from. People in the same family can order different things at fast food restaurants, but all of the food is made the same way so that customers are used to the familiar smells and tastes. Each item tastes only slightly like what it's supposed to taste like. For example, chicken bites only taste like chicken. Pollan shows that many of the ingredients in his family's fast food meal came from corn. He also shows how many resources have gone into making this meal, which is cheap for the consumer but has huge costs that are spread across the whole country's industrial food chain. Pollan uses his second and third meals, which are both rural or farm-based, to talk about what it means to eat natural or organic, showing how different the food chains can be behind these terms. First, he looks at large-scale farms, whose goods are sold in big grocery stores like Whole Foods. He learns a lot about farming from Joel Salatin, a small farmer in Virginia who runs Polyface, his family's small farm. Salatin takes a dim view of big organic, seeing it as equally bad as the industrial food system. Pollan wants to know if Salatin is correct. The organic movement started in the late 1960s as an alternative, countercultural protest against corporate food. It was marked by back to the land, off-the-grid hippie ideas that were specific to each place. Pollan says that as this movement grew more common and famous, it turned into a booming business. As the need for organic goods grew, organic farms had to make sacrifices that don't always line up with the environmentally friendly goals of organic food or the stories told by Whole Foods packages and ads. He goes to places like Cascadian Farms, which was once a cooperative community but was bought by General Mills. He also goes behind the scenes at a chicken farm that says it is free-range but only gives its chickens a small, empty piece of land that isn't used. The chicken feed on this farm is raised without chemicals, which is the only real difference between it and an industrial chicken farm. For the most part, food in the industrial organic chain is easier to identify and track than fast food from the simply industrial chain. However, a lot of what happens behind the scenes is still bad for the environment. For instance, big organic needs even more fossil fuels than industrial farms sometimes to deal with the waste that comes from growing so much food without using chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Pollan thinks about the proof that organic food is healthier and tastes better while eating a dinner made with items he bought at Whole Foods. He also thinks about how much it would cost to fly his organic asparagus from Argentina to San Francisco in January. Pollan comes to the conclusion that industrial organic does go against the goals of organic. It's expensive and bad for the earth, but it might be better for your health and taste. Many years later, Pollan goes back to Polyface Farm, which Salatin has called Beyond Organic. Polyface is dedicated to the real meaning of the word organic, not just the letter of the law, which is what the government says that lets commercial farms call themselves organic. It works like a closed, almost self-sufficient system that depends on the natural processes of its environments and organisms. Salatin, who calls himself a grass farmer, has come up with ways to farm that don't use up his land but instead keep it healthy. The chickens follow the cows around healthy, biodiverse, grassy fields and eat the grubs that come from the cow dung. Pollan sees a group of animals that are happy and well-functioning because each system feeds the next. They make tasty, nutrient-dense food and almost no waste. Also, happy workers take care of them. Pollan takes part in the careful, hand-killed killing, and he watches as people from the neighborhood come to get their meat. Salatin's method is better than the first two, and the food that comes out of it is much more tasty and probably healthier as well. It also makes people want to talk about food in interesting ways, thanks to Pollan's experience and closeness to it. One major problem is that Salatin doesn't give a good answer to the question of how these kinds of farms could be scaled up to feed everyone in the modern economy. Pollan tries to hunt and gather all of the ingredients for his last meal, which he calls the perfect meal, so that the food chain stays as close to home as possible. The fact that he is directly interacting with his food forces him to think about more basic issues, such as the morality of killing and eating animals and the ways that people decide what wild foods are safe to eat, especially mushrooms. Even though he can't fix the moral problem, he chooses that he will eat with full awareness and purpose of what is in his food. He gets help from Angelo Garo, who takes him looking for wild pigs. Pollan kills one of the pigs they find. Pollan learns how to find chanterelles in the wild, fishes for abalone, picks cherries from a nearby tree, fava beans from his yard, and wild yeast to use in bread. He shares the food with his friends, which is a carefully organized work of art. They all feel connected to what they're eating. Pollan's perfect meal is, on the other hand, completely wasteful and can't be maintained over time. It's the opposite of the unsustainable fast food meal. While Pollan doesn't say how Americans should eat, he does say that food is the most direct way that people interact with the natural world. He tells people that the choices people make about what to eat have effects that go far beyond what one person can see.
About the author. Pollan was born and raised on Long Island, New York. He went to Bennington College and Columbia University to get his master's in English literature. Thereafter, he worked as a writer and editor for magazines. From 1983 to 1994, he was executive editor at Harper's, and from 1995 to now, he is a contributing writer and editor at the New York Times Magazine. Pollan started writing about gardening and farming after doing some research on them as a hobby. He is now one of the most well-known people in America when it comes to problems related to the modern food system. He has written 8 books, 5 of which were New York Times hits. He has also won many other awards, including being named one of Time's 100 Most Important People in 2010. It has been since 2003 that Pollan has been the Knight Professor of Journalism at the School of Journalism at the University of California, Berkeley.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.